Hi, my name is Dr. Racially, aiming to speak truth to power, and this is my daily thought. The contradictions of a racially segregated Sunday morning. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. said it best. He said the most segregated time in America is Sunday morning. Now, think about that, right? I go to church regularly. Oftentimes, we'll go to different churches when I'm in different places or visit different places. And you see the way that churches are racially segregated. And, I think about this from the perspective that religion is supposed to be the space where everybody's treated the same. And when you go to different churches or you think about what God looks like in your head or what Jesus looks like in your head, whether that be a man or a woman, whether that be white or non-white, that you actually realize the way that religion actually supports racism and segregation. And I think all we have to do is think about what happened at the AME Church, at Mother Emanuel Church down south in South Carolina, when 9 black churchgoers, including politician Reverend Pickney, and he was also the pastor of the church, where 9 black people were killed by a white supremacist, Dylan Roof, in the church. And what's fascinating, they opened up their doors to this young white man to come into the church. And then he shot and killed them all. And the thing I remember from that moment, in addition to that horrifying, tragic incident and event that we should never forget, there were 2 things that stood out to me. I mean, the first thing that stood out to me was the fact that the police officers then took Dylan Roof to Burger King to get something to eat. That just blows my mind. You talk about a slap in people's faces. But the other thing was, I was listening to a commentator on the news, and he said, well, if I go to a black church, I would get heckled and I would get harassed and I would get probably beaten up. Man, in what world does that happen? No, that's completely untrue. And the Dylan Roof example is the exact reason why. This dude came up into the church. They welcomed him. Never once thought about him killing them. They never once did anything to him. He's the one who did something to them. And in response to that incident, this commentator says, oh, if I go to a black church, something's going to happen to me. When has a white person came to a white church and something happened to them? Anybody who's been to a black church knows that people are welcomed with open arms. There are actually times during the service where they say, if you are a visitor, please stand up. And normally people come up to you and shake your hand and give you a hug and say, where are you from? Thank you for coming here. Thank you for supporting our church. That just shows how little that some white people actually interact with black people to make a statement like that. And for a lot of white people, they know that's not the case. But the interesting thing is, many of them are silent when people make statements like that. So instead of standing up and saying, man, that's not true. I'm around black people all the time, or at church or in the military or at work or in my neighborhood, man, they're not trying to attack you. Particularly not at church. But most of the time, people are silent. And so, as I think about the contradictions of a racially segregated Sunday morning, and as MLK said, it speaks to how far we still have to go in different aspects of society. Yes, there are certain areas where we see a certain level of integration. But in the spaces where we go to supposedly be the most vulnerable, to supposedly be the most open, to supposedly be the truest of who we are, whether that be at church or in our households or at a play date with our kids or our kids' schools, we pretty much see people who look like us. And unfortunately, that impacts our children. And when that impacts our children, that leads to them growing up thinking that racial segregation is okay. Thinking that, a white student killing a black student on campus like University of Maryland isn't actually considered a hate crime because, people talk racist all the time. Like it's just kind of a normal part of our discourse and our narrative. And so in that regard, he murdered Lieutenant Collins, but was it hate? He was part of this group that, did discriminatory racist stuff, but And that's because the bar we have for what hate is in our society is so high, because racial tolerance is so high. And unfortunately, racial tolerance, and I should say racial tolerance in the sense of racist tolerance, carries over to Sunday morning and becomes the part of our week that carries over with us throughout the rest of our week and throughout the rest of our lives, particularly for those who grew up in the church. So as always, conversations matter like Black Lives and Books, and I hope this has sparked one.